And can you start off by saying your full name, please?
Sure, it's Larry Craig Galloway.
Address?
I live in Payette, Idaho, 10700 Payette Heights Road, Payette, Idaho.
Date of birth?
October 27, 1964.
And what branch of the military were you in?
I served in the United States Army and also the Idaho Army National Guard.
And for how long?
32 years.
Craig, we'd like to welcome you here and thank you for sharing your story with us and with the Library of Congress. We'd like to just kind of start off by a little background. Where were you born at?
I was born in Lewiston, Idaho.
And did you grow up in that area? And
I did.
go to high school there?
I did, and actually I dropped out of high school in Lewiston.
And what did you do after you dropped out of high school?
That leads to my military story. Thank God the Army was still taking high school dropouts. It really saved me and put me on the right track.
So how old were you then?
When I first enlisted, I started the process at age 18, and I finally got in at age 19.
And so you joined the Army.
I did.
Okay. And what was your intention there, or what did you want to do, or did you want to be full-time, or a lifer, so to speak, or was it just looking for something to do?
Well, I was kind of drifting through my life as a teenager, and I knew that the Army would probably give me some good direction and would offer me opportunities I may not otherwise have. And I had grown up, admiring people that had been in the military. Most of my heroes were military people, and I always think in the back of my mind, I always intended to be in the military, and I made that happen by enlisting in the Army.
Okay. So you enlisted there in Lewiston?
I did.
Okay. And then when you went off to boot camp, what was your feelings? Was it the first time you left home, or?
Yeah, it was kind of scary, but I have a little interesting story on which branch I chose. I, of course, was a high school dropout. I had left a message with the United States Marines, and they never called me back. So then one morning, I woke up and I decided to shave off the stubble on my face, the 2 or 3 whiskers I had. And I went to the recruiting station, which had every branch there, including the Marines. I walked into the middle of the hallway, and every one of the recruiters was there, including the Marine Corps recruiter that morning. And the only recruiter office that there wasn't somebody looking at me when I walked in was the Army recruiting office. So I walked down there, and I had made up my mind that morning I was going into some branch of the service, and I made it happen within roughly 2 days. The Army recruiter, I think, didn't understand that I fully intended to enlist in whatever branch was going to take me, and I was going to make my life better. And thank goodness the Army did take me. So that's how I picked my branch of service, was because they weren't looking at me that morning, and the Marines never called me back.
So they weren't looking at you?
They were not looking at me.
I see, okay. So at that time when you enlisted, did you get a choice of what you might want to do when you get in, or?
Yes, there were several choices. Because I was a high school dropout, though, that limited my choices. I scored high enough on my scores, though, to pick different options. My goal was to be in tanks. On my family's farm, I had used a bulldozer quite a bit, and I really loved driving track vehicles, and I envisioned myself, driving a track vehicle, and the recruiter used that to lure me into the choice that I picked, which was field artillery with some of the track vehicles, and then lured me into Pershing, which were the nuclear missiles and field artillery. So the recruiter was a little bit slick and used some of my wants to fit the military's needs. But overall, it was great.
So when you left home, it's the first, you grew up on a farm, is that it?
Well, I grew up in Lewiston area, but my family had a farm. I had a lot of relatives that lived in the Kendrick area, and so I spent a lot of time up there, and I had a lot of really good experiences there
Okay.
in my childhood.
And so then you, when you enlisted, this the first time you'd left home for any length of time?
For real, yeah, so that was the first time.
Have girlfriends or anything behind?
I didn't really have a girlfriend when I left.
Okay. So how, was it scary when you first left, or?
It was, although I had some really positive aspirations and expectations from the Army. So it was scary, but at the same time, it was really exciting to me.
So where did you head to?
Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
And what time of the year did you go?
I landed there in January.
Okay, so what was your feeling about the big change of scenery between Fort Sill and Lewiston?
It was very cold. I remember the wind blowing and a little skip of snow here and there, and that the climate was a lot different than Lewiston.
So how did boot camp go?
Boot camp was a really big adventure for me. It met my expectations and more. I found out that I could run more than a mile because I was too afraid to stop running. I was convinced that I could never make the first run we went on, which was about 3 miles, and I had no idea I could run that far. But I was too afraid to drop out of the run and too afraid to drop out of anything after that because of my drill sergeants. I was very inspired to do more than what I ever thought I could accomplish. And that's really how my basic training went. Being a high school dropout, I kind of had, I had my reasons for dropping out, but I also had a lot of issues because I dropped out. I had low self-esteem because of that. I had a low opinion of myself. And Army basic training helped me reach inside of myself and expect more out of myself, and I found that I could do more. Mainly from the fear of the drill sergeants. I didn't want to let them down.
Okay, so you get through boot camp, and then what's your next assignment?
I got assigned to the 3rd and the 9th Field Artillery, which was part of the 214th Brigade at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It was a Pershing artillery battalion. I went to Alpha Battery there, and I spent the next 3 years, most of the next 3 years, assigned to Alpha Battery.
So why don't you tell for the record here kind of what was an armored battalion?
Well, this was an artillery battalion.
Artillery, I'm sorry.
And the interesting thing was I went during the height of the Reagan buildup in the U.S. Army, and the first unit I went to, Alpha Battery, was a stateside unit. The main mission for Pershing was in Europe, in Germany. So a lot of times in that battalion, we had individuals that were coming back from Germany and done with their tours and getting out of the military. There were, on the state side, quite a few undesirable people still in the military in the early 80s. And the interesting thing during that period, during the Reagan buildup, was to watch the change and the transformation of the U.S. Army from really a second-rate type Army with obsolete equipment, broken equipment, and a lack of training and a lack of leadership, to watching the equipment get changed out for more modern equipment, watching us go through accelerated training and watching some of the bad leadership that we have get removed. And a lot of that happened initially during the first year I was in 1984 with that unit. Everyone in the unit had a secret or a top secret clearance because we were dealing with nuclear weapons. And everyone in that unit went through a lot of drug testing. There was still a lot of illegal drug use in the U.S. Army when I first went in. And my unit was a unit that was focused on the state side because everyone did have secret and top secret clearances. And I was put into my first unit where I was one of the only people in my platoon that didn't smoke marijuana or use illegal drugs. I had a platoon sergeant, a platoon leader, my section sergeant, my squad leader, and pretty much everyone in my squad that were smoking marijuana in the morning. When we weren't out in the field, they were smoking marijuana at lunchtime, and they were smoking marijuana in the evening time. And I watched every one of those people get removed from the military, including my platoon leader and platoon sergeant, and get replaced with people that had different values than what they had. So
if they flunked the they started drug testing them, and if they,
yes,
obviously, if they using that much, they're going to come up positive. And so then they would remove them from that particular job.
And it wasn't just line up and take your analysis. We had frequent raids from MPs. Whole companies and units would show up of MPs that were armed with automatic weapons, shotguns, and drug dogs. And our whole battalion, which was roughly 1,000 plus troops, would be brought out into a common area at 2 o'clock in the morning. The unit would be alerted, so everybody off post would be brought in. Everyone would have to UA, and the drug dogs went through the parking lots and every room and every building of our unit, and we watched people go away in handcuffs. That happened over about a 6-month period. Anyone who they found drugs on or anyone who was positive was detained immediately and taken out of the unit and taken to a confinement facility.
So would they eventually be kicked out of the Army, or would they just assign them to a different job?
Most of them were removed, especially the leadership. Some of the junior members had an opportunity to go through drug and alcohol rehabilitation. But I experienced over about a 1-year period watching the former unit that had a lot of heavy drug use in it go to a unit that had some very motivated leaders and some very motivated troops, and not being the only one in my platoon that wasn't smoking marijuana.
So what was your job? Okay, first of all, you did your boot camp at Fort Sill and you stayed there.
Yes.
Yeah, so you didn't have to go somewhere else.
Right.
So kind of what was your duties, or just kind of describe what you did?
Sure. I was a Pershing missile crew member. So in my unit, we had the old Pershing 1A missiles, which were basically an obsolete system from, I believe they were developed and fielded in the 1960s, and the Pershing 1A was developed and fielded in the mid-1970s. So that's the equipment that we had. And after that initial year, or right at the end of it, my unit went through a transition to the Pershing 2 missile system, which was part of the Reagan buildup. And we all went through that training, and we were fielded with all the new equipment, the Pershing 2 missiles.
Okay. So then you were at Fort Sill for 4 years or 3 years?
3 years.
3 years. And so how do you feel like? Do you like Fort Sill, or?
It was an interesting post. I also was on several missile launches on the new Pershing 2s at Cape Canaveral, Florida. So I got to spend about 3 months at Cape Canaveral and Cocoa Beach, Florida, and that was actually kind of fun. Even though I spent a lot of time out there on guard duty, but watching the missile launches there was really, really neat, and being part of that. Also got to watch 2 space shuttles launch before we had the tragedy there, and I can't remember, I believe that was 1986 or 85, when the space shuttle, we had
The first one.
Yeah, the first one. So I got to do that. I also got to go down to White Sands, New Mexico, and I got to guard Germans, German Pershing missile troops when they launched Pershing 1 missiles at White Sands. And I got to be there for that. That was really interesting, as well as a lot of the really neat training that we got to do later on in my tour. They put my whole unit in aircrafts and C-5A Galaxies and C-130s, including the Pershing missile systems, which are bigger than a semi-truck load. Loaded them in C-5 Galaxies and flew us up to Michigan, and we worked on our tactics with the Air Force as they tried to hunt us down. That was really interesting, and working with some of the new camouflage systems to hide our systems that we had on the ground from the Air Force.
So were you successful most of the time?
Most of the time they found us, so no, we weren't. But it was fun trying to hide from them and moving all the time.
So did you get to enjoy Fort Sill as time went on, or?
I really did. One of the biggest things that happened to me while I was there, besides having very good leadership brought in, and instead of the toxic type leadership we had before, was that I had a really good first sergeant in my unit who noticed that I hadn't completed high school. He brought me into his office and confronted me about being a high school dropout. And my platoon sergeant was there as well. And I told my first sergeant that I really wasn't interested in school. I had no interest in being there. I didn't want to be around teachers. I didn't want to be around school kids. I was in the Army. I was going to stay there forever. It's what I loved. That's what I was going to do. And he told me, absolutely not. You are going to get your high school degree. You're 2 credits away. You're going to go down a day, and you're going to sign up at the education center, and you're going to complete your high school diploma. So I went down to the education center, being a good soldier, but I signed up for GED classes, and I thought I was going to get away with that. A week later, I got called back into the first sergeant's office with my platoon sergeant to give him a sit rep, an update, and he exploded on me when I told him GED. When those words came out of my mouth, he just erupted on me and made me go unenroll from that and enroll in night school at the local school and complete my high school. So that was really tough in a field artillery unit. My unit was always out in the field doing exercises, but my first sergeant made sure I got back every night, and there was somebody always there to bring me back to my unit when I was done with night school.
So was this a regular high school? Or
It was.
Young kids there, so
There were some adults there as well. It was the alternative school in the evening, and which led to when I graduated, when I finished, the superintendent of the schools for Lawton school district wanted me to graduate with the rest of the kids, getting their diplomas, and he wanted me to wear my Army uniform, my dress greens, and I said, absolutely not, I'm not doing that. I don't want to come, I don't want recognition, I just want my diploma, I want to be done. Well, we compromised. I got to wear my blue jeans, but I had to go up on the stage in front of all those hundreds of people and get my diploma. And I'm really, really grateful that I had really good leadership that pushed me, and I met wonderful people like that superintendent that pushed me to get my diploma and finish things in my life, which led to my dad talking me into using my GI Bill when I was done and going to college.
So, so this was all Fort Sill. You graduated from high school, and so you like Fort Sill over all the weather, big changes.
It was a big change. The
Go from
chiggers,
one-
the ticks, the mosquitoes,
tornadoes
that came through. Yeah, it was a lot different climate than I was used to.
So did you see Geronimo's grave while you were there?
I did, and I actually jumped off the cliff where Geronimo jumped. The
Oh, really?
Army had made that into a rappelling cliff, and I went many, many times down that with my unit for rappelling.
Mm.
So that was interesting to be there and see that part of the history of that area.
Yeah, that was an old time fort for a long time in the
Yes,
Old
it
West
was.
and all that. Okay, so after you're done with Fort Sill, then where's your next assignment?
Well, as I mentioned, my dad talked me into going to college.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
finished your enlistment.
I did.
Okay.
And I re-enlisted into the Idaho Army National Guard. And I went to Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston. And with the intent that I was going to go back on active duty because I love the Army and I loved what they had done for me. It had really turned my life around and given me goals, directions, and purpose in my life. So I started college and I re-enlisted into the Idaho National Guard. And my first unit I went into was the 116th Engineers in Lewiston. I re-enlisted as a medic, so I got to go to another Army school. And I completed that summer. In between semesters, I went to combat medic school, and that opened up some doors for me as well. On the civilian side, I was able to get 2 jobs as a firefighter EMT, which paid really well while I went to college and gave me a lot of flexibility to go to school and work on my schooling while I was working there at the fire department.
So when you do that, do you keep your rank and or how does that
I did.
work? You don't have to start all over.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I was a specialist when I got off active duty, a specialist 4, and I remained a specialist. Then I got promoted to sergeant in the Army, or the Idaho Army National Guard. And then when I was done with college, my intent was to go back on active duty, but the Army had started the drawdown right after the Gulf War. And I really did not like the options that they had for me to re-enlist as. My intent was to go back on active duty Army and then go to federal OCS and get a commission and then stay in the Army and finish off at least 20 years.
So when you okay, so you go to college and did you didn't like teachers and you didn't like students, so you got over that, I assume.
I did. The Army helped me get over that too. It really helped me grow up and mature a lot. I was very lazy in school, and I had the ability to not study a lot and still pass tests and get fairly good grades, but I really wasn't applying myself.
Mm-hmm.
The Army taught me to apply myself.
So you enjoy college then? Or?
I actually did enjoy college.
And what did you get your degree in
criminal justice, and I got really good grades. One, because at first I was afraid I was going to do poorly, and I really applied myself, and it really paid off. And the Army taught me that I could study, that I didn't have to be lazy about things, and apply myself, and I could succeed. And that was really beneficial for my college degree.
So once you get your degree and the situations happen with the military, then you decide to be a fireman? You become a fireman?
I was
Firefighter.
part-time.
Oh, okay.
And because I picked criminal justice, because I thought a career in law enforcement might be somewhat similar to the military. And just in case I couldn't go back in the Army or I didn't want to go back, and well, that happened. I started applying for different law enforcement agencies, and I was also working part-time for a sheriff's office at the time. I got hired by the state of Idaho, probation parole, and I've actually been there ever since. I went over 24 years in June with probation parole with the state of Idaho.
And so then you could continue to be in the National Guard?
I did. So I had two parallel careers. I had the probation parole career going on, as well as my Idaho National Guard career at the same time.
What sheriff's office did you work for up there?
I worked at a Soton County Sheriff's Office in Clarkston, Washington.
Side.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what happens next military-wise?
Sure.
I guess you get a job with probation parole, so you're doing that. So
Right.
obviously you get to be a major here somehow at
Yeah.
some point. So go ahead.
While I was enlisted, I competed for Soldier of the Year with my unit and then my battalion, and I won battalion, and then I came down to state, and I was still an E4, a specialist for when I did that, and then I won Idaho, the Idaho Soldier of the Year. And then I competed against other states. I think it was 5th Army then, and I think I got 3rd place. I got beat by North and South Dakota, which was interesting in and of itself. But through that, the board interview that I had to do for the state, the sergeant majors asked me why, after I had gotten a bachelor's degree, I hadn't went to OCS yet, and challenged me to push myself on the leadership end of it. And I had always thought I was going to go back on active duty and get a federal commission through OCS, but I had never really thought about doing the National Guard version of OCS. So anyway, that challenge kind of stuck in the back of my mind, and I eventually took those sergeant majors up on their challenge to go do that. And I went through the Idaho Military Academy, which took approximately 15 months. The state OCS program has to meet all the requirements that the federal OCS program does, and it takes time to do that with one drill week in a month and a couple annual trainings. So I went through that process, and I got commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant.
So you never had to take a leave of absence on probation parole?
I did not. I used my vacation time and military leave time from that.
Okay. So when were you commissioned a 2nd lieutenant, I assume?
In 1993.
Okay. And so how did you feel about that?
I was really excited. That was a really, really tough course, and it really challenged me. I had been a leader before as a specialist, and then as a sergeant, as an enlisted. I was pretty cocky. I thought I knew all the answers. I have 100 stories about 2nd lieutenants doing stupid stuff before, when I was a sergeant, or before as an enlisted soldier. And then all of a sudden I was that 2nd lieutenant making all those mistakes, and it wasn't so funny anymore, being the person in charge and being in new territory. So it was really a challenge. It really challenged my character, and it challenged me to develop myself and become a strong leader.
So when you get commissioned, and you still stayed with your same unit then?
I did not. I moved
I thought
down.
they usually make you move, but you do so.
Yeah, I moved to Armor. There were openings in Armor down here in the Treasure Valley. A lot of openings for tank platoon leaders, and so I filled one of those positions.
And so you moved from probation, parole, and enlisted.
Well, the interesting thing was is I got hired for a job down here with probation parole, so it all just kind of came together about the same time period.
Oh, well, that's amazing that worked out, isn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Get two of them at the same time. So then you moved to Boise?
I moved down to the Nampa-Caldwell area.
Okay. But you were assigned to Gallup-Field.
I was, and also the Emmett unit, which was Alpha Company, 2nd and 116th Armor.
Okay. And so, as a second lieutenant, what are some of the mistakes you made, or what? Or I shouldn't put it that way. What are the lessons you learned?
Lessons learned. To not open my mouth before I thought first, to not key the mic before I thought about what I was going to say first. Things that I said meant something, even when they were wrong. Oftentimes I would say things without thinking, and my troops would go ahead and do them. And watching those kind of mistakes unfold, thank God nobody ever got hurt. But that was probably the biggest first lessons that I learned, to think before I opened my mouth, to put some thought into things. I also learned too to make split-minute decisions, immediate decisions, and to live with the consequences. My guys couldn't stand around and just wait for hours on a decision to be made. And because of the nature of armor is fluid and moving, especially with the newer tanks that we have. Decisions have to be made, and need to have a little bit of wisdom and experience when you make some of those decisions too. So the other big lesson that I learned was to, one, trust my troops, to trust my non-commissioned officers, my NCOs, and to let go of things and just let them do their jobs. To learn from them, because I didn't have all the answers. That was a really hard pill for me to swallow. I was a typical second lieutenant, but I had had almost 10 years enlisted experience, and as a non-commissioned officer too. I thought I had all the answers, and I learned really fast that I had no idea.
What was that? Okay, so during your National Guard thing, you got called up, looks like a couple of times.
Sure.
Right, so, 93, is that when you, when did you first
I
get?
got commissioned in 93. My first deployment was I was actually called up in 2001, and I was assigned to the 163rd Infantry Battalion out of Montana as a company XO for a mechanized infantry company. Unfortunately, right before their deployment to Bosnia, they had a real terrible turnover with their leadership. And at that point, I was a tank company XO, and I had been, I think I was on my second tank company as an executive officer. And that unit was taking one of my tank platoons attached to them to make a company team. So they had two infantry companies, mechanized infantry, which were in Bradley's, and one tank platoon out of the tank company I was in. And they needed a company XO. When they called needing an XO, of course I was going to go take care of my guys and their guys. So I initially that summer, my whole battalion was on cue to go to Bosnia, or we had been told that we might go, so many of us started training for that possible deployment. Then it went down to a tank company, which was the company I was in, that they may have wanted. And then out of the tank company, all they wanted were 2 tank platoons. And so I had already went through a lot of the training, and I was having a really hard time thinking of my guys being attached to a unit where I didn't know those people, and then getting deployed overseas, just kind of letting go. And I wasn't trying to be a mother hen, but it was really, really difficult for me to think of my troops going somewhere without me. So of course, when they needed an XO, I was ready to go.
So what was your rank then?
I was a first lieutenant.
First lieutenant. And so where do you go from there? Where did you go from there?
We did a train up that lasted about 2 months. Some of the gunnery that we did was at the Orchard training area, south of Boise. And then some of the training that we did was in Montana, with the units. And then we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, with the unit that we were attached to. And that was the 2nd Battalion, or correction, the 1st of the 14th Battalion, under the 2nd Brigade of the 25th Infantry Division, Tropic Lightning out of Hawaii. We were their heavy, quick reaction force. We were their armor on the ground. They were a light infantry unit, and we were being attached to that battalion. So we went through Fort Polk, Louisiana, through the joint JRTC, which is a training center there, a rotation, and with the 25th Infantry Division and all the other units that were attached to them. And then we got deployed to Bosnia.
Okay, so you go to Bosnia. What do you think of that country?
Well, I was on the advanced party because I was the XO. So I had been thrown into my unit, which had lost their company commander, their company XO, and their first sergeant at the last minute. I was a replacement XO. I'd had about a month to get to know all the other troops. I knew the tank platoon, but I didn't know the other 2 companies and leadership. So I got to know them over a month. And then we got thrown in with the 25th Infantry Division, and I got to learn a whole new battalion there. And then I got to go on an advanced party with people I really didn't know too well. But that's a really neat thing about the military, is that everyone's there for a common goal, and it's a sister and brotherhood where everybody takes care of each other. So I felt like I was taken into that new family under the 25th Infantry Division, and very well. And we got boots on the ground in Bosnia, and it was my job to look at the equipment and assign for it after I inventoried it with 2 of my sergeants, 2 of my NCOs. And I had roughly 2.5, 3 weeks to do that before all the rest of the troops were going to show there. So one, it was a shock being thrown into a unit as a brand new leader in that unit, and then being absorbed into an even bigger unit, and then being detached from everybody ahead of time, and being thrown in with the unit that has nothing to do with you, and all they're trying to do is get out of there and hand over the equipment to you. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks I was there with the unit that was rotating out. I was very, very happy to see my unit show up there.
So what did you think of the country itself?
I was in shock, culture shock, one, of being thrown into the different units, and then 2, being in that area, even though the war had been over roughly for 5 or 6 years by then, there was a lot of damage still, and you could smell a lot of the mass graves there. You could smell decay and bodies. The graveyards, the burial sites were all along the IEBL, the boundary lines where the units were fighting, because of some of the customs and religious beliefs of the fighting factions. People were buried immediately. So there were real rudimentary graves. You could still smell a lot of that, the garbage and filth around the country. and seeing that every building along those fighting boundaries had been demolished or blown up, had a satchel charge thrown in it, a hand grenade that had bullet holes through it. That was really shocking to me to see that, especially in such a beautiful, beautiful area of the world, to see the damage that human beings had done to each other over ideology was pretty shocking to me. But the most shocking thing for me initially was seeing all the little kids running around and seeing the indicators of what they had lived through, seeing a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old that looked like they were 5 or 6 years old. Their growth was stunted, their teeth had a lot of tooth decay, and other indicators that they were really malnourished for great periods of their formative years.
So kind of what was your duties there in Bosnia then?
I was the XO, the executive officer for an infantry company team. So the biggest things that I did day to day, I made the operations orders for the patrols that went out from each of the platoons within the company. So it's my job every day to build an operations order the day before. I made weekly operations orders for the week, and then I made operations orders daily the night before, and I would adjust those. And I would issue out those orders daily to the oncoming patrols out of the platoons. So that was one of my main missions there. I was in charge of all of our equipment and all of our ammunition. We had 14 Bradley fighting vehicles. We had 4 M1A1 tanks. We had 4 mortar tracks, and then we had up-armored Humvees for every one of those crews and more. We had a lot of rolling stock. We had a ton of vehicles. We had Connexes full of ammunition. We had equipment. We had vehicles that were being broke constantly, and it was my job with my NCOs and my maintenance to make sure that operations happened every single day, that equipment was fixed and brought back up to a readiness level that we could use it, to make sure that my troops had everything that they needed to get their missions done, and also to roll out with them from time to time on my own patrols.
So the hostilities were basically over, so your job was kind of like a police force or security force kind of thing.
Yes, it was a peacekeeping mission.
Peacekeeping.
Right, and so we had some interesting areas of Bosnia, our infantry company. We had along the Zvornik River, or an Opstina, which is called a county, along the Drina River, which separates Serbia from Bosnia. And that Zvornik was the Opstina, which is the equivalent of one of our counties. That was one of our bigger areas, and we had quite a few issues in that area. That had formerly been occupied by Bosniaks, which were Muslim Bosnians. The Serbs poured over the border at the start of the war, and there were a lot of atrocities that happened in that area. And most of the Bosniaks that lived in that area were pushed out. And it was, when we were there, it was occupied by Serb Bosnians and Serbians. So that area wasn't as friendly as some of the other areas that we had. We also had one area that was Bosniak, so they were Muslim Bosnians. We had another area and that was Kalasia. We had Osmachi, which was a mix of Bosnian Serbs and Bosniaks. And then we had Sekavici, which was totally a Serb area up in the mountains and had been isolated and had not been approached much by American patrols. So that was one of our main missions, was to go in there and build bonds with those people in that area that hadn't seen a lot of the outside world. And that was very difficult at first. And I'm happy to say that it ended with us being pretty well accepted in that area.
How long were you in Bosnia then?
I was there about 8.5 months.
So when you left, you felt good about your assignment, it sounds like.
I did feel really good about it. I really felt good about taking care of my troops that I'm sure someone else would have taken care of them, but I'm glad I was there to be the one that took care of those soldiers. We had some bad things happen, and I'm really glad I was there to help them through it and to be one of their main leaders. And that was really rewarding, a really rewarding experience.
You didn't get back to, in the meantime here, have you gotten married or anything?
I did.
Family? And
I
so you were separated from a family while you were there?
I was. That was probably that was the most difficult part.
You had kids?
I had kids. I had a wife. Getting on the plane, especially on an advance party, and being there pretty much by myself, not with the unit, but having to say goodbye way ahead of time, that was very emotional for me. Of course, I'd been separated for Army training and other stuff for, I think the longest I'd been away was about 2 months from my wife and kids at that point. And knowing that I wasn't going to be back for about 8.5 months, that was really, really tough. So that was hard. One time while I was there, I decided to do the webcam, and because I hadn't seen them in about, I think, 6 months, and it just destroyed me emotionally to do that. I told my wife I can't do this again, and I didn't. I did not do a webcam. I just called him on the phone about once a week and got my 15 minutes to talk to him.
So what year and did you leave Bosnia then?
It was October of 2002.
Okay. So then you come back to the area here, and what was your next National Guard assignment there? Are you still a first lieutenant or a captain?
I was, and I got promoted soon to captain, and I went to brigade headquarters, which was an experience I'd never had before. And I changed MOSs again, my military skill, occupational skill. I went to military intelligence, and I became the brigade assistant S2. So that was another big culture shock for me. I'd been armor, and then I had done my mech infantry time for basically 11 years at that point, or 10 years.
Okay, so how long did you continue in that assignment?
I held that assignment for roughly 1.5 or 2 years as the assistant S2. And boy, was that a learning curve. My hat is off to people that are smart enough to do military intelligence and do it well.
So what was your next assignment then?
I stayed in military intelligence for our deployment to Iraq when the brigade got called up. And so we went again to the Joint Readiness Training Center for a rotation there. And actually we spent quite a bit of time before the JRTC being activated, and that was down at Fort Bliss, Texas, for a train up. And that was roughly 4 months, I believe, of train up for the whole brigade. And then we went to the Joint Readiness Training Center, and after we completed that, we waited a while, several weeks, and then we got deployed to Kuwait, and we waited a while there, and then we went north into Iraq, Most of the brigade went to Kirkuk, and I went with brigade headquarters to Kirkuk. But I also had the opportunity to be a rear detachment commander in Kuwait when the company commander of Brigade HHC went north with a convoy. So I waited back in Kuwait as the assistant S2 and also as the rear detachment company commander there. And then I took my own convoy north from Kuwait all the way up to Kirkuk, which was an adventure.
So what happened there? And how did you well, what all did you do there, I guess?
In Kuwait, we had roughly about a month and a half where we prepared to go north into Iraq. So we did some more training and got our units ready in preparation. In military intelligence, we studied enemy contact and we're staying on top of what the most current threats were and where the threats were happening in the most likely courses of the enemy action as we moved into Iraq. We're also in constant contact with the unit that we were going to rotate on, which maybe not by accident, but it was the 25th Infantry Division and units that I had went to Bosnia with. So I knew actually quite a few of the people in that area, in that division, and the brigade that we were rotating in. So we kept in contact with them, we made our preparations, and then we moved into and through Iraq with ground assault convoys north. And I had the distinction of being the last from the brigade, the last ground assault convoy to go north. So I got stuck with whatever was left that needed to move north. And I luckily was given my choice of troops. So I stole the MP platoon from brigade and some other really good soldiers from brigade headquarters, HHC. And I also was given a really good transportation platoon, and then I got assigned a whole bunch of civilians, also known as third country national truck drivers, who were from all over the world. And I had a convoy roughly 3.5 kilometers long of civilians, a transportation company or platoon, and then my MPs with gun trucks. And we hobbled up north over about a 6-day period, all throughout Iraq to go to Kirkuk. And that was a very interesting trip.
So how long were you in Iraq then?
I was in Iraq from I think it was January 2nd or January 1st until the end of, or the first part of November, I believe it was. So roughly 11 or 12, almost 12 months, 11 months.
So away from family again, or did
Yes.
you was gone for the whole year? You never had a chance to go back? Or?
I got to go home once, and I put in for my leave to time with my wife and my anniversary, because I had missed so many anniversaries, which was in July. And so I did get to go home in July, and I didn't miss that anniversary.
Good. So overall, what was your feelings of Iraq and your assignment there?
Overall, I had a really, really good experience. The first 4 or 3.5, 4 months, I was still the brigade S2, the assistant S2. I was also a night battle captain at brigade, and I had a really good section. I had great non-commissioned officers and soldiers. We worked all night long through the night, gathering up intelligence information and trying to make sense out of things, and building reports and sending those out to our adjacent units, other brigades that were near us, up to division, and more importantly, down to our battalions. and giving them the information that we had. And we also did a briefing in the morning for our general, and then all of the other leadership, the colonels and lieutenant colonels in the unit. So that was very hard work. Those were 14 or 15-hour days each and every day. I had 1 day off, and I believe it was 4 months. And we did an awful lot of work. And we did the best we could to try to figure out what the insurgents and the enemy were doing to us, and try to build some patterns and predictive analysis for the units to work off of, so to make them safer and also help them do their jobs out in their areas to stabilize things.
So how did you feel when you left Iraq then?
I felt really good. I had the opportunity also to be on what's called a MIT team for the last 8 months. I was, or 7.5, 8 months I was there. I went back to the 163rd Infantry, and I was their military intelligence person for the training team. And we went out 3 to 5 days a week, and we trained leadership for the Iraqi army. I got to train 3 different battalions, leadership on operations, military intelligence, and I also got to train some of their non-commissioned officers and junior leadership officers on basic soldiering skills, which they didn't have. That was the most rewarding experience that I had. That was in a very hostile area called Hawija, which was Sunni Arab. It was a town of about 70,000 people. They were kind of north of Tikrit. They absolutely didn't like us in that area. We took a lot of fire, a lot of hostile fire on a daily basis, because they did not like us in that area, at least initially. Mm-hmm. It was very, very rewarding to me to start working with the Iraqi army. And it was very interesting because many of those leaders that were lieutenant colonels, majors, and captains had been in the former Iraqi army. They were Sunnis, so they had the advantage of going to schools, and some of them had actually been to Iraqi colleges. They were very well trained, supposedly, but they lacked basic things like map reading skills, basic leadership skills and philosophies. And I found that really, really shocking, but it helped me understand overall what the Saddam Hussein regime had done previously with their leadership. They had used a lot of the former Soviet tactics and other communist type tactics with leadership, where you don't train them to do a lot of things, but you give them information that they only have, and they're allowed to lead troops that have none of the information. And that way you get compliance with your directives, and you control a military. And that's how Saddam had controlled his military, is that his leaders in key positions weren't stupid people by any means, but they were not very well educated on basic soldiering skills. And of course the troops were really, really brave, but they hadn't had a lot of formal education, and they were at a great disadvantage because they weren't trained like our troops are to step up to the plate and go and accomplish the mission without somebody telling you to do it. They self-motivation, teaching your lower leadership, successive management. Yeah, those were not things that were ever instilled in that military. So going to the unit and spending quite a bit of time with them and working on basic soldiering type skills and things that we think are bread and butter in our military took an awful lot of time, but it was very rewarding to do that with that leadership there. And the reason or I knew I had made a difference when I was about ready to leave, when I saw an incident happen during one of the elections in October of 2005. In our area, the year or that spring during polls, or that winter when we'd had another election, we had a sniper that was working, and he was shooting little kids that were there with their families, that were proud to be able to go vote. His target was little children, like 2 or 3 year olds, and he targeted them by shooting them in the head. So that scared off. It was a scare tactic that he used over a couple days period, and then he also used that on us too. His target was usually a headshot. But I had seen some of the results of that throughout the year, and then the next election that we had after I'd spent about 6.5 months with the 3 of those battalions and their leadership. During the next election, we let them plan most of it. We were there as advisors to help them tweak things. But an incident that happened in the middle of that election was insurgents went to a polling station and took the ballot box, all the ballot boxes. And I watched the Iraqi army unit there launch their quick reaction force, get to where the insurgents were in their vehicle driving through town, and they were putting bullets through them within 3 minutes. And then they took back all the ballots. So I knew I had made a big difference, when I watched that happen. 6 months before then, we would have never got the ballots back. There would have been chaos in the city. There would have been fire that erupted for 2 or 3 hours, and it would have taken hours and hours and hours for the Iraqi police to get things under control, and the Iraqi army as well. And that's what I had witnessed in the past. Lots of people getting killed and hurt in that area unnecessarily because of a lack of leadership and direction. And to know that I had played a part in watching those people become more independent and being able to lead themselves, for me, it was really, really rewarding.
I need to take a break, just a second.
Sure.
Okay, so let's continue here, and why don't you summarize kind of your tour in Iraq?
It was really rewarding for me overall. I got to meet a lot of Iraqis, some Sunnis, some Shia, and some Kurds, and interact with them on a personal basis. And the most striking thing to me was that on an individual, one-on-one basis, most of the Iraqis wanted the same things that we wanted. They wanted a better life. They wanted better things for their kids and their families and the next generation. Collectively, I don't think they were so convinced that we were there to help them. And I think collectively they really resented the reasons we were there. But on a one-on-one basis, they just wanted a lot of the same things that we all want for our kids and our families and our country.
Okay. So then you returned to the United States, and you wanted to talk about your last 4 years in the National Guard.
Sure. The biggest thing that was most painful, though, about being in Iraq was being away from my family and my kids, and that was really, really tough on us. So I thought about retiring when I got back, and I got talked into coming back out of my leave of absence, and I'm really, really glad I did. I was over 20 years at that point, and I could have retired. But one of the most rewarding things I did in the National Guard was to be a TAC officer and be the senior platoon trainer in officer candidate school for the Idaho Military Academy. I got to work with staff that helped train future leaders and future lieutenants. And I got to be very involved with their training over the last 4 years of my career. And that was really, really rewarding for me. to watch that next generation of leadership come up and their capabilities, their abilities, and the great things that they're going to do, leading the next generation on. For me, that was a great way to say goodbye to the Army.
So you retired in 2015, so
I did. This last December, I finally retired after